Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Season 2 of Hiker Sessions. This, as you know, if you've been watching our Season 1, this is where we interview thru-hikers, day hikers, and everyone in between. We all had a tremendous hiking season up here in Maine and met many amazing people out on the trails. Today, we are fortunate to have one of those individuals we met as our guest. And honestly, I can't think of anyone better to kick off Season 2. He is Ben Montgomery, also known as Nephew on the trail. I met Nephew in Monson at Shaw's Hiker Hostel this year, and also again after he had summited Katahdin. He officially completed his thru hike of the Appalachian Trail on July 23rd. But not only is he now an AT thru hiker, class of 2025, he's also a Pulitzer Prize nominated writer. And if you go to ChatGPT and ask for a list of the most popular books ever written about the AT, not just 2025, his book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk, the inspiring story of the woman who saved the Appalachian Trail, comes in as the third most popular book of all time.
Wow.
And if you also ask ChatGPT how many books have been written, it can't give you an answer. It just says hundreds and hundreds of books about the AT have been written. So I consider us very lucky to have him join us today. And thank you again, Nephew, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Sloggy. I'm thrilled to be here, primarily because a short time after I met you, the first time I was in the 100-mile wilderness. This is the coolest thing that happened to me on the trail. And I woke up and hit the trail about 5:30 a.m. one morning. I didn't see anybody. I'd slept alone even in the shelter the night before, so I hadn't seen anybody. I was walking all morning. And then maybe 11:30, 12 o'clock, I see this woman coming southbound down the trail. And I was like, another human, and your heart gets a little excited after you haven't seen anybody in a long time. And she got maybe, I don't know, 20 feet from me. And she said, just as I'm about to say hello, she said, "Are you Ben?" And I was caught off guard. I said, "I'm sorry." "Yes, my name's Ben." And I'm thinking maybe I met her at a hostel and somehow she went north and was hiking south. And she said, "I watched you do a book talk about Grandma Gatewood in Sandwich, Massachusetts, like 10 years ago." And I said, "Wow, that's the most amazing thing." So I've felt famous in the 100-mile wilderness, which is probably the only place that I would achieve any kind of fame like that. So Maine is special to me, and I'm glad to join you on this podcast.
Yeah, no, and we're happy to have you. Like I said, that is so cool. That's the community I find is the greatest thing I like about the AT, and I'm sure it's the same for the other long trails as too. That's after finishing my thru hike last year. That's what I missed the most out there. I was reading an interview you did about 4 years ago, and at that time you said that you were thinking about doing the AT like every day. You thought about it. So I guess the first part of my question is, what finally happened that allowed you to take that time to go and kind of do that thing that you'd been thinking about doing for so long?
Well, a couple of things transpired. I got very sort of publicly fired from a media job a couple of years ago. It made newspapers and was the talk of Twitter for about a day. And I decided it kind of turned me off to journal. I've been a journalist for a long while. I've been a working newspaper guy for 20 years plus. And this event just sort of gave me a chance to reset a little bit and hit pause. At the same time, both of my daughters went off to college, and so I'm an empty nester for the first time. And I found this window, which we're all sort of, anybody who's dreaming of hiking the AT, you're looking for this window of 3 or 4 months where I don't have anything on the calendar, where I can just slip away unnoticed and go do my thing out there. And this window opened up kind of early this year, to be honest. I looked at the calendar and I was like, there's not much going on, and I got a little cash in my pocket, and I can budget this out and figure out how to make this work. And so maybe with the middle of March, I started looking at my gear and thinking, all right, what do I need if I was really going to do a thru hike? What else? And I laid all my stuff out, and I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to pull the trigger this time. And I looked at the AT registration page for hikes. I was thinking April 1st, maybe a good start. I looked at April 1st and it's the longest line. They don't tell you how many people are out there. It was 50 people were leaving Springer Mountain on April 1st. And so I thought, I'm going to get going a few days before that big bubble. And I was probably like March 15th. I was like, all right, March 26th is going to be the day. I don't know why. I'm just going to get up there and get started March 26th. I flew to Atlanta. My bag got delayed in Tampa. I got stuck in Tampa an entire day. So I missed the March 26th start, but got out there on March 27th. And it was just really that, like this conspiracy of losing your job, like getting fired in this way that makes you think about who you are and what you want to be next, and then shipping your kids off to college. This little window of opportunity open, and I jumped on it. Thank goodness.
Well, I'm so glad you got that opportunity. You mentioned, taking a look at your gear. So it sounds like you had hiked, and I've read a little bit about you've hiked some sections of the AT, and especially when you were researching the Grandma Gatewood book. How much experience had you had back, even younger, and when as you got older, as in your adult life?
I had done a handful of small hikes, mainly like unprepared, just weekend excursions, before I started working on Grandma Gatewood's Walk in about the early 2010s. That's when I started getting serious about backpacking. And I thought at the time maybe I got a chance to hike the whole thing just to see what she saw. But early in the reporting, I talked to somebody at the ATC who told me uh, the AT is this is 2010. The AT is 95% different today than it was in 1955. It's constantly being rerouted to, preserve sensitive ecological areas or give the hiker a better experience, get you closer to water around a certain stream or whatever. And it's always changing shape. And it occurred to me back then, well, it's not going to do a whole lot of good for my book if I thru hike the AT, and it's not the same trail that she walked in 1955. So I took Emma Gatewood's journals and found spots that I knew were still part of the AT, like through Harper's Ferry, it's the same trail, Hunt Spur up Katahdin, same trail, over Fontana Dam. There's only one way to get across Fontana Lake. Those sorts of things I knew. I had photographs of her in a particular place, or I had her diary entry from a particular place, and sort of drop in on those places to do reporting and see what she saw. But I didn't get a chance to do a real hike, at that time. A few years later, I just got a bug and decided to take my kids out for like a month. And we just kind of picked a stretch of trail, the southernmost stretch. I had a friend who lived in Charlotte, so we flew from where my family lives in Tampa to Charlotte. He drove us over to Hot Springs and just kind of like dropped us off and left us there. And in a very naive way, me and three kids learned how to hike the AT going southbound. We walked what amounted to about 260 miles from Hot Springs to Springer. We had to skip a little chunk in there to make time, but 250, 260 miles, me and three kids, just like learning how to make it work, and that's not easy. We were picking up tips from other hikers and figuring out our water. And, we didn't bring salt. Like we brought a bunch of dehydrated vegetables that first go. We didn't bring a lick of salt. So we just ate salt, unsalted, dehydrated, like soft vegetables, for the first week of trail until we hit resupply at Standing Bear, I think.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's how you do it. You
yeah,
get into it like that where and I loved it doing it with kids because they're my buddies. And also, we're in it together. So we learn from each other. It brought us together in these ways that few people get to experience with their family. It was so much fun that we did it the next year. We hiked the Shenandoahs about 200 miles from Rockfish Gap to Harper's Ferry, and had a blast doing that. Invited a couple more people. My nephew came with us that time. But before going out this year, those were the two longest chunks that I'd done, 250 and nearly 200.
yeah,
That's about all you need to get warmed up. Like I felt like I was approaching the trail, approaching a thru hike with enough information to get me through. I knew what my body could do. I knew that my pack was going to be lighter because I went every time I took my kids out, I wound up carrying not most of their stuff, but like a good chunk of their stuff, all of our food, a lot of our water. lightening their load, my pack would be 50 pounds or more. And boy, hitting the trail this year, I think I weighed in at 24 pounds. And I'm like, God, I could put on another 10 pounds and still feel pretty good out here because I'm so used to carrying all my kids' gear and, in my backpack. So I was hiking with this New Zealander who was very serious about grams, very Gramweenie-ish. And she would get on me. Why are you carrying a little solar panel to recharge? Why do you have a full size toothbrush? Like these sorts of things. I'd be like, dude, I feel light. Even if I had two sleeping bags, I'd still feel good out here because my pack is that much lighter than it has been in my whole hiking experience.
Well, that's certainly good experience, and you had obviously more than a taste doing a couple 200-mile trips out there to learn. And I think I learn them every time I go out. I don't think it matters how
Oh yeah.
experienced or anything you are. So based on those hikes, like, did you have what were your expectations for a through hike? Did you have did you have preconceived notions just based on on those two hikes, or were you just like, I don't really still know what it's going to be like? Like, what were you thinking when you hit the trail?
I had a decent sense, obviously, what it takes. You know what I mean? What the trail is like, where you're going to find shelters, how to use a map, all of those orientation type things, or they were in my back pocket when I set out on this time. The things that surprised me, I had never had norovirus before, and I didn't know how rapidly devastating that could be. It caught me on a stretch of trail where I couldn't sit down. There was like no spot to be comfortable. And so I just had to kind of keep walking as I suffered the symptoms of norovirus, including nearly uncontrolled defecation and vomiting. I mean, it was miserable for about, you know, I don't know, 2 hours and 2 miles of trail. Um,
It's that's tough too because you're losing, it's tough to find water and you're probably not drinking enough water. You're losing weight. You may not have lost it as rapidly as I did, but
I was
so to start having that kind of symptoms really wipes you out, right? Like, how long did it take you to recover where you felt like strong hiking again?
I had been trying to catch up. As I mentioned before, early on, day 4 on this trail at Muskrat Creek Shelter, I think, I overheard some people talking and heard a woman say that she had left on March 27th. And I introduced myself and I said, I also left March 27th. I don't know how we've missed each other over these 4 days, but nice to meet you. And her name was Bubble Wrap. She's from New Zealand. Anyhow, I said, well, sounds like we're on the same pace. Maybe we'll hike out together tomorrow. And we did, and we wound up hitting it off. And as you know, you meet some people on the trail and you just got a natural rapport. And she and I had this banter that was, right off the bat, it was awesome. So we hiked together. I had to get off the trail at Gatlinburg to go resupply and meet a friend. We hiked together until then, but she had a deadline. She had to keep going. So I wound up getting back on trail 2 days behind her, and we were doing about 25 miles a day. But I spent the next 20, 25 days trying to catch up to Bubble Wrap because I was having so much fun talking to her. So when I got norovirus, I'd been putting in like 32, 33-mile days just trying to make up miles to get back up with Bubble Wrap. And I was already physically down. Hadn't quite gotten my food dialed in, and I was physically down. And norovirus hit me at probably the worst time. Depleted energy wise already, putting in big miles. Not my feet weren't feeling good, and all of these things like conspired to really make the next probably week super difficult for me. I don't think I ate solid food for about 24 hours when I started throwing up. And when I finally eating, it wasn't like my appetite came back all at once. It took 3 or 4 days before I felt hunger again. Um, and then you catch up, you eventually get your body restocked and get those calories back in you. But boy, it was miserable and it caught me unaware. I'd never experienced it before. So I didn't know what I was dealing with or how long it would last or what to expect. and it made me aware for the entire rest of the trail about personal hygiene and like not eating other people's food. I had to watch out for bubble wrap because she got it twice. And she would, because she's always grabbing for, oh, there's a donut out, like we do.
Yeah.
And, so I had to slap her hand away a few times. Don't eat that, that bagel that might have been sitting out on a table in a hostel for 4 days. Who knows? It
Yeah,
might
a
be.
bunch of people could have picked it up and set it back down a few
Yeah,
times, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember last year it was rampant, and I heard this year was one of the worst years actually. But last year, right when I started my hike, I got to Gooch Gap Shelter, and a bunch of people had got it already. And I've never got it, but I'd met through hikers in the 100 Mile Wilderness many times who had got it, and it sounded like definitely something I didn't want to get. And a Gooch Gap Shelter, second night I get there, there's 19 of us tented around the shelter and
Oh,
one person in the shelter because nobody wanted to risk getting norovirus from the
yeah,
shelter
right.
and the picnic table. But I thought that was funny. Hey, you mentioned your solar charger
Yeah.
on the back of your pack or what have you. And I have a friend who's actually his trail name is Solar because of that. But uh, we're so encumbered by technology in our day-to-day lives. I mean, you as a writer, you probably started out on a typewriter or a keyboard, and we're meeting here in a virtual studio online when I'd be rather much sitting next to you sharing a beer or something. How long did that take you? Because I'm sure you're tied to computers a lot with your occupation, to feel free of that. And during while you were out there, were there any like conscious changes that you said you were going to make when you got off the trail and finished?
I was very plugged in early on to the idea that I wanted to have some sort of epiphanical moment. That's not even a word. Some epiphany on the trail. A moment when you reach the yogi master and learn all the secrets. You know what I mean? And I thought this would, of course, come on top of a mountain. I didn't know which one, but I spent each summit sort of longing for this for nature to reveal some hidden mystery to me. And to be honest, I don't think I found it on the trail. Like maybe it reminded me of these very simple things, that we're all human beings out here, that uh that there are really, really good Americans who care deeply about this country, uh that exist all over the place, who come from all walks of life and find themselves in this long, you know, game of follow the leader every summer. Um, Meeting those people and like just communing with other good humans was a reminder to me that I've got a place here in this country and that it's worth fighting for. And maybe that's what's different coming off the trail for me. I was feeling very dispirited with the news coming out so hot and heavy these days. With so many of my friends sort of picking up signs and joining protests back home, doing things that we do as Americans to participate in this democracy. It felt like almost like me, like a cop out to jump on the trail this summer when so much is hitting the fan, so to speak. Um, and I felt that guilt for the first month or so, really maybe until I got off trail at Penmar Park. So halfway, I remember turning on the news in a motel room for the first time. I was going to go back to trail days to do a book talk. And I got in a motel in Waynesboro, Maryland. I turned on the news and it's just coming at me, like I got a kid at Harvard, thank goodness. I went to Arkansas Tech University where I played football for the Wonder Boys, but somehow my hardworking daughter got her butt into Harvard, of all places, came from Tampa, Florida, graduated from public schools, worked and got into Harvard. And I turn on the news and hear about these attacks against Harvard and how they're being framed as an anti-Semitic university and on and on. I spent maybe the next hour calling both my senators, trying to get somebody on the phone to tell them anyways, all this stuff is coming to a head. And I wound up just getting a marker and following the lead of my hero, Woody Guthrie, the great Oklahoma troubadour, comes from where I come from. and I wrote with a black magic marker on my light AF backpack, where you can read it when it's rolled up. Um, this machine kills fascists, and this was my protest. It alleviated that guilt just a little bit because people would ask me on the trail, "What does this mean?" You know, they wouldn't have. Maybe they weren't familiar with the phrase from popularized by Woody Guthrie, but what does that mean? What are you talking about? So I tell them about Woody and get a chance to talk about it. And this was my, my form of protest on the trail. But those are the things that stand out to me. But I'm still forming memories, to be honest. Like I've not revisited all my photos. Maybe I took 500 photos on my cell phone. I've not looked through them yet. So in some ways I'm still like letting those memories of the trail experience form in my head before I revisit the photos and see what it was really like for me. I'm letting the stories kind of still simmer a little bit and like reveal themselves, and maybe there'll be a lesson that comes out of this whole thing in a year or two. I'm convinced now that an epiphany doesn't necessarily happen when you're on the trail. It might hit you like 6 months, a year down the line. But those are the things that stand out to me, about this experience.
Do you miss being out on the trail? But for those reasons, and maybe just being out in nature.
I said the other day, I'm visiting with some old friends this weekend in Arkansas, and one of them, they paid attention, many of them, to my trip on Instagram and otherwise, and one of them said, "I bet you're glad to be off the trail." And I was like, "Yeah, actually, not really." You know what I mean? That I the I told people this on the trail. I was like, "Man, it feels like the worst days out here are better than the best days back there." And everybody was like, "Yeah, you know." And I say that back home, like some of the worst days back there really are better than the best days in society. And uh the I'm not a person who misses the creature comforts necessarily. I don't miss television when I'm away from it. I don't miss sleeping in a soft bed. I actually like the feeling of sleeping on an air mattress. I sleep good on it. I sleep great out of doors. Uh, I miss the shit out of the trail, man. I think about it every day, and it worries me because I'm a guy who I have a place in society. I have a place with friends, but more and more, I don't want to be here. I just want to be out there walking and
Yeah.
not on the AT necessarily. I think I would get bored doing the same trail over, but this world has a lot of trails and it's accessible. If you figure out how to make it work as a poor person, just kind of like slipping by and using things that people are wasting, like you can make it work for pretty cheap. And all of these things are within reach right now. And I dream of like getting back out there.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my agent is like, "What's the next book? When are you going to write?" And I'm just like, "A walk, I just want to walk."
Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you this. It's either fortunate or unfortunate, but again, I'm only a year removed from my thru-hike. I think about it every day still, and I'll be walking through random woods near homes or things, and I'll look and I'll be like, that would be a sweet spot to put a tent. Like that's where my mind goes. And we talked a little bit before we started recording here about this gentleman who thru-hiked in 1991, trail named Strider. He thinks about it every day still, and it's 34 years later, but, they're good memories. You mentioned bubble wrap a couple times, and a lot of my memories are definitely formed around people and not mountaintops, as you kind of alluded to when you were looking for your epiphany. Were you surprised at the deep connections you made with people who you'd never met in your life on the trail?
Oh, for sure. And, with her especially because, I wasn't in the market to date. I'm not looking for a hiking buddy necessarily. I viewed this as a solo hike. But we just happened to hit it off, and it makes hiking often more enjoyable. There are times when I want to hike in silence, and that was fine. We sort of both respected each other's boundaries because sometimes you do look for solitude out there, but a good hiking buddy makes the miles go by pretty easy. And also you get a chance to like share information. you're not leaning on your own knowledge. You can run your ideas by other people, and often that protects you and keeps you safer and helps you have a better experience and all those things. But the depth of our quick bond was very surprising to me. She's 33 years old. I'm 47. So we're not similar in age, different generations. She's a cop in a small town in New Zealand. And by the way, when was looking through I kept a very, very light journal. Every night I would just kind of jot down some major themes. But I was looking through my journal, and when I met Bubble Wrap the first time, I said, "But she's 5'0". She's 5'0". I've I've got I've got a bunch of cop friends, right? And I don't necessarily need any more friends who are police officers. And so, anyways, I note that in my book, but we don't have a lot in common. But boy, we had such a good time learning from each other. I now know what it's like to grow up on a salmon farm on the South Island in New Zealand. Like, I know the process of raising them from eggs to fingerlings to, the whole so you're learning all of this stuff about stuff you might never have known before, just walking with somebody who's a little talkative. And like I said, I had to get off at about halfway Penmar Park. I said goodbye. I thought for the last time to Bubble Wrap. She kept going. At that point, we've been together from Muskrat Creek to Penmar. It's what, 1,500 miles almost.
Right.
So I thought I was saying goodbye because I was going to go back to trail days. It was going to be like a week off trail. But when I got back to trail after that, at 8 days off, she was 200 miles ahead of me or more. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to catch her. And I hiked through Pennsylvania by myself. And I was laying in a shelter, I think approaching Palmerton, Pennsylvania. No, it was at Burt's Hostel in Palmerton, I think. There's a couple of guys in the shelter, and I told them my situation. I said, I've been hiking alone all the way through Pennsylvania. I'm just not having a great time. And here's why. And I told him about meeting Bubble Wrap, and everybody was like, dude, why don't you just go catch her? Like, you know what to do. And so I did. I took like 5 buses and a train or 2 and got up to Cheshire, Massachusetts, and walked into a gas station. I was like, I didn't even tell her I was coming. She was like, Nephew, Bubble Wrap. And anyhow, then we hiked the rest of it together. Well, through the Whites. And then she was going faster than me. I let her go again, saw her afterwards. But we'll be bonded, I think, for life. I will forever I may not talk to her for, on a routine, but I will forever appreciate that experience, just getting to know somebody in this intimate way, right? We're doing tick checks occasionally and sharing motel rooms, and at the same time, completely platonic, and this sort of beautiful friendship that formed over the course of hiking that trail. I'll appreciate it forever.
How emotional if you step back and take yourself to that day when you said goodbye, like how emotional, if at all, was that for you to say goodbye to somebody you've been hiking with for so long?
You're playing it off, right? Like, so I'm tough, and yeah, see you later. It was a good time, Bubble Wrap. You know what I mean? But it was, it's an emotional experience. I knew, so she had to go. This person is an adventure a minute, but she was trying to finish by July 1st. She wound up completing a thru hike in 89 days, an incredible pace.
Wow.
But she finished so that she could fly to the West Coast to meet her sister, who's coming from New Zealand with their bicycles. And their plan was to ride across the U.S. on the Transamerica Trail. So they finished that. Happy to report. I watched on Instagram as they finished that just a few weeks ago. Then they flew to South America. Now they're in Peru, riding their bikes the length of South America. So I'm tuned. She's still on an adventure, a 2-year adventure, but I'm tuned in, kind of cheering her on from over here.
Wow, that's an incredible adventure she's on. You mentioned a little while back, you mentioned your agent reaching out to you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and we'll get a transition to the book because I want to talk about the Grandma Gatewood book too before we wrap up. Any of the characters that you met on the trail, or any situations or anything, any thing give you like an idea for a book or anything while out there? Just like subconsciously, even if you weren't looking for ideas.
Yeah. I've decided. So I've written 4 nonfiction books, and I've been a journalist, a newspaper journalist my whole life. But the last time I was in New York, dropping a kid off at school, I met with my agent and had a chat about doing some fiction. And so I've been thinking about doing a piece of fiction, and my story, at least part of it, is based on the AT, and it's a story that takes place over a couple of generations. And so I'm hesitant to say any more about it because it's still taking shape in my head. But in terms of nonfiction book ideas out there, I lost a son in 2020, my 11-year-old son. And I met a handful of grieving fathers on the trail, just kind of quite randomly. I don't know if the universe put us together or what, but I had this experience maybe around the time I met you of hiking down a dirt road in Maine, and I saw another hiker from a long distance, and he looked hobbled, but he was going pretty slow, and I wound up catching up to him, and we chatted, and he was on the trail because he had lost his adult son a few years ago in a car wreck, and the two of them had talked about hiking the AT together and never found that window of opportunity, and then the son died in a car wreck, and RP, as his trail name was out there sort of doing a through hike in honor of his son. A lot of people out there for a lot of different reasons, but I'm tuned into the people who are out there dealing with their grief. And I was thinking, I was thinking of the AT, the ways in which we use the AT to get something that we need. People go searching, dealing with their grief, right? That's always present out there. But I think more and more people are hiking the AT as a form of protest. And I'd like to maybe explore this in a magazine story or something, like people who actually set out on the AT with the intention of checking out of society. That's the main purpose. Like, I'm not going to use gas. I'm going to live on the cheap. I'm just going to check out of capitalist America for a short period of time, as a form of protest. I met people doing that. A lot of the park rangers who got fired from government jobs in the early part of the Trump administration, those Doge cuts, they were out there on the AT, figuring out their way to reset. So the book, I think the nonfiction book that started to form in my head was the things that we ask of the AT, the different things that we come to the trail expecting. I think that would be some fertile territory to explore.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, then the things that surprise us too. Like I know I was surprised by, I'm of the age late 50s, and of course my parents were of that time where you really didn't share things, verbally. It's kind of all internalized. And what I found, and I'd love to get your thoughts on yourself personally, that I found myself sharing things with people. I can remember I met this gentleman stump knocker in the Shenandoahs. He'd lost his wife and was just sharing with me, years earlier, a couple decades earlier, and he was just out for a day hike. And I think I hiked with him for maybe an hour 15, and we shared things back and forth that probably I hadn't shared with many other people except those very close to me, perhaps even just my wife in my life. And that really surprised me, and it wasn't uncomfortable. And I don't know you personally. I don't know if you're in your regular life, I call it a sharer, but did you have experiences similar to that?
Yeah, of course. I actually have some intimate relationships with male friends and women, but my male friends, we share a lot, so I'm one of those guys who probably tells too much, but I am tuned in to other people's stories when I'm on the trail. And this is a great example of this, I think, in I can't remember what stretch of trail I was on. I was actually coming back through Connecticut. Somewhere in Connecticut, there's a hot dog stand. And I don't know how I got tuned into this, but it was maybe an eighth of a mile off trail. And I was like, perfect time for a hot dog. I'm just going to duck off and go eat a hot dog and get back on the trail. I really couldn't afford the time off, but I needed some food. Didn't want to eat what was in my pack. So off the trail I go. I sit down. I get my hot dog. I sit down. Guy comes, orders a hot dog right behind me, sits down, start chatting like it always happens. Trail names first, and then what brings you out here, this sort of thing. I don't want to betray any intimate details because yeah, I'm not going to say his trail name, but he's an Episcopal priest and was off trail because he was trying to get sober. And we start talking back and forth, and I tell him about growing up in the Southern Baptist Church, and he's telling me some other stuff. And anyways, I said, "Are you out of the priesthood because you chose to be?" And he said, "No, I got kicked out." And boy, we just got deep immediately over a hot dog. You know what I mean? And these are the things that happen on the trail. You wind up in these incredible conversations where people are revealing intimate details of their life. And I think out there, what we tend to do, maybe more than other places in life, is tell people how we messed up. Maybe that's the difference in the AT. We're less likely to hide our secrets or our shame. We sort of wear it out there because everybody's so raw emotionally. And so, yeah, you wind up going to these deep places with people sort of very quickly. You just skip all the BS and get right to the crux of life. Those are the most love, and I'll always remember on the trail. Those little moments when you meet these people and are surprised and are reminded that we're all out here dealing with human challenges. That none of us is a golden vessel for the Lord. We are all full of shit.
Yeah. That's what I liked the best. I think that, the anonymity. I thought that, and I've said it before and probably on this show too many times, but I thought that the anonymity of trail names would make people less honest. But
Yeah.
I found that it was 180 degrees the other way. The anonymity made people more open and more honest. I think a good transition to talk a little bit about the book, because it was a tremendous book. I just read it last week again for the second time. I had it down here on my shelf, and after I met you, I came home and I'm like, I know I have that somewhere, and I dug it out and wiped the dust off it, and I just read it again. It's just a tremendous book.
Thank
So I think a great transition would be, how did you get your trail name Nephew?
Yeah. So I've messed with trail names, doing long stretches with my kids. I tried on like 3 or 4. Uh, Down in Georgia, I got stung once by a ground hornet and my whole face went numb, and it was probably a near death kind of thing, but I got saved by some Boy Scouts with some Benadryl. Anyways, my kids start calling me ground hornet, and I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool, that's a good trail name." But what is it about me? It doesn't say anything except I happen to be stung by a ground hornet. So I was still kind of in the market when I got on this through hike. And people say you're given your trail name, and that's true, but sometimes you can help people find your trail name. And as I was, people, why are you out here? Well, I wrote a book about an AT pioneer and fell in love with the trail. Who's the pioneer? Grandma Gatewood. No shit, I read that book. And I was having these conversations just in the first couple of days over and over and over again. And people would always ask, well, why did you do that? But like, why you doing that book? And I would tell them, well, I'm a descendant, actually. We're connected by blood. I am Grandma Gatewood's great great nephew. And so one person at, I don't know which shelter, said, you got a trail name yet? Because nephew is perfect. And I was like, you know what? That does actually sound better than ground hornet. It sounds, somebody tried to call me Braveheart for bringing my kids out there. I was like, so that doesn't really work. Anyways, nephew, it worked. It doesn't say right off what you're trying to say. You know what I mean? It takes some conversation to get there. One word. I don't like 2-word trail names. I don't know why.
I
Uh,
agree. I agree.
there's some of them 3 or 4 words. No thank. I just want one word. 2 syllables, good, nephew, easy. So it stuck. Felt right. It was like, oh, okay.
Nuanced.
It is, yeah, all right. It's marketing because it allows me. See, people would say, "Why are you called nephew?" And then I would get right. Well, here's a chance. I'll get right into it, and I'll sell a book. And so I'm going to write this whole experience off of my taxes. I'm a business. Look, all those ramen noodle packets, a couple of pairs of ultras, These are all business expenses when you're out there marketing, marketing your book. I did book talks at trail days, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Couldn't
that's
get
awesome. I wish I came this close to going to trail days this past year. I wish I had because I'd have loved to have heard your talk. I'm definitely going next year. How old were you when you made the connection of being a relative to Grandma Gatewood? I'm assuming it wasn't like super young. Did that take a little time to figure out how you were related to her?
my mother never met her what would be her great aunt. So Emma Gatewood was my great grandmother's sister. Um, but my mother had siblings who remember meeting her, their aunt Emma. But I grew up hearing stories about this distant relative of ours who died 5 years before I was born. She passed in '73. I was born in '78. So um, I just knew her to be this distant relative that we had who was eccentric, who, through my childhood, I only remember knowing that she was the first woman to hike the AT. And I knew nothing more than that. I knew distantly that the Appalachian Trail was a trail that ran, up the mountain chain. But none of the details until I was much older, and really until I wrote a story for the newspaper that got a lot of attention. It was about an unsolved lynching in 1934, and it went viral, so to speak, and wound up with an agent who reached out and said, "Do you have any book ideas?" And then I went reaching for these different things that I had worked on as a journalist, and struggling to come up with, here's an opportunity, like the golden opportunity. I'm in my mid 30s at the time, and a New York agent who, by the way, had represented Barack Obama, uh, uh, who reaches out and says, "Do you have any ideas?" And I wanted to, like, strike while the iron's hot or whatever. And so I started reaching all these different directions, and I thought, I wonder if anybody's done a story about that relative of ours who hiked the AT back in the day. And I start learning about her, for the first time, like digging up facts and not just family legend. And the more I learned, the more I thought, well, maybe this would make a book. I reached out to her daughter, her youngest daughter, Lucy, who was in her 70s at the time, and I said, you don't know me, but I'm a relative, and I want to do a book about your mother. And it took a little while. I had to go to Jacksonville, Florida, where Lucy was living at the time. Uh, and it took me going there and visiting with her about two or three times, maybe, before she really kind of got comfortable and trusted me enough with the material. She took me into a guest bedroom and opened up a closet, and there were banker's boxes full of material that she had kept about her mother, both things written by Emma, her correspondence, some journals, um, a biography like a small biography that she wrote about her life for descendants, um, scrapbooks that she kept, things that have been written about her, all this stuff. And Lucy just kind of turned all of it over to me and said, "You're the guy who's going to do the story." And off to the races. I felt very lucky that the timing felt right. That nobody had done it when I finally got turned on to it. I feel like had I waited a few years, somebody would have jumped on doing the biography of Grandma Gatewood. Um, uh, I feel lucky that I had that family connection because Lucy wasn't about to trust just anybody. She'd been burned a couple of times on some documentary projects where people had come and taken her stuff and started down the path of doing a documentary, and then it fell apart for whatever reason. It wasn't made. And so she felt like she had given her time to different projects and hadn't been, that had never been seen to fruition. So, anyways, all these things were kind of leading me to, being in the right place, the right time to do that
Yeah.
book. And thank goodness, because right out of the gate, it started selling. Larry Luxembourg, who's done a book about the AT and is one of the founders, I think, runs the Appalachian Trail Hall of Fame and Museum. I was talking to him as I started work on the Emma Gatewood book, and he said, if you do a book about the AT, it will sell 10,000 copies. If you do a good book about the AT, they're unlimited. The sky's the limit. It could sell 1 million copies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anyone who has ever dreamed of hiking the AT or hiked the AT. I found in reading it a second time, so I would say, if anybody who's read the book, who hiked the AT, read it again, because what I found, and you did a great job. Before I talk about that, what I noticed the most, and again, I read it with different eyes, right? Because
Yeah.
I'd read it once, I hiked the AT, now I'm looking at it. I thought you did a remarkable job getting into the mind of Emma, and I know you had the journals and things and stuff that helped, but just the way you wrote it, it was almost like she was telling the story and you weren't writing it. Was that a conscious thing you were trying to do, or did that just end up being the way it came out on paper?
Well, I appreciate you noticing that. This was a challenging story to tell in the sense that, number one, I didn't have a living main character, right? And in some ways, that gives me that liberates me from certain things as a writer. But also, I don't have any direct source to go to ask these very, very important questions that I come up with as I learn more about her and her story. Like, why did you really hike the Appalachian Trail? Because she told a lot of different people a lot of different answers. And ultimately, none of them were super satisfying. Oh, I did it on a lark. That doesn't help us. You know what I mean? Why are you out here? That's the question we all ask each other. We want to know what brings you out here to the trail. Well, you got to dig to get into her past, and thank goodness 4 of her 11 children were alive when I started reporting this book. So I had a chance to ask them about their mother's relationship with her father, and they were waiting for the right person to tell this story. They all remember very clearly how abusive their father was to their mother over 30 years. They remember witnessing him beat her up and drag her by the hair and abuse her sexually and otherwise. Um, they lived with this. And so I felt like the backstory was as important as her story of the hike. I had this great arc, her hiking the AT for the first time in 1955, reaching the summit of Mount Katahdin. It makes for this perfect arc, climbing a mountain. But then I try to hang the secondary arc of her marriage and her relationship onto that initial story, so that as you're walking with her on the AT, it's how you set out, but you begin to learn about all these things that might have contributed, the building blocks that might have led her to getting on the trail, the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her husband, how she fled into the woods to seek refuge from him. The woods became her solace and her salve. And you learn these things. She didn't articulate these things late in life, but you learn that these are, of course, the things that got her on the trail to begin with. And that becomes a truer story than a story that just leans on the things that she said and the things that she wrote. Um, uh, you know, Ultimately, we're trying to answer that question, like what brought you out here, And I think the book gets pretty close to that. I think without spoiling it, it gets pretty close. But I also had to bring into this story the context of 1955, this important year in American history when the tables are really turning from a culture of people who walked as a way to get from place to place, to a culture of people who drove cars as a way from getting from place to place. And all these things were being noticed in 1955. The kids are fatter today than they were 10 years ago. Why? Automobiles, they're riding. So you bring that in, and that becomes like 1955, hopefully becomes a character in this book. And that makes it more than a trail book. There are a lot of books that are written by people who just get off the trail, and they kind of become a journal of their experience on the trail. I didn't want this book, written by a real writer who's made a career of this, to be a trail journal. And so I had to bring in kind of the tools of the trade, like 1955 is a character. The hurricane, that I give birth to that as though it's a real thing. It's named. It takes a course. It breaks up the eastern seaboard. I birth it in the Atlantic Ocean. You know what I mean? So hopefully all those things make this read like a book that is good fiction, when we really know that it's based in fact. But it's got cliffhangers and suspense and surprise and all those elements of a great story. um, written by a guy who's a decent practitioner of the craft of writing. And her story is what makes this book. You know, it's not nothing I did. It's this beautiful effort, human endurance, this showcase of the power of the human spirit uh, in this unworthy vessel, this 67-year-old body who's out there, dealing with the challenges of the trail, in addition to the hurricanes and the people who tell her to stop. You got no place, no reason to be out here. Go home, grandma. These sorts of things.
Mm.
Um, so all of those things, I think, hopefully make this an enduring story, an evergreen, as we call it, an evergreen story that people want to read year after year, even though it happened long before any of us were born.
Yeah, no, I enjoy it. Like I said, just reading it again a second time. In the title, you mention, I've got the book right here. It's a great book. Anybody, there's the picture of the cover. I love the cover too. Y On the cover, it says, "The woman who saved the Appalachian Trail." Is that tied in with that time, that 1955 when people stopped walking? Is that kind of what you're trying to talk about there? Like her presence and the media attention that she got on the second half of the trail really brought the AT to the forefront.
Yeah, make a couple of arguments in this book. So after World War II, the trail was in a state of disrepair, and I don't really get deep into this, but a lot of our effort, men and women, during the war was focused on winning the war and not on keeping this path hikeable. You know what I mean? And so the trail had fallen into a state of disrepair. Um, Anybody who hiked it in the 1950s could tell you at length about how terrible it was. Great blowdowns, unblazed sections, sections that made no sense, go two different directions, things like that. So this was a trail that Emma Gatewood found. So the case that I try to make in the book is that, number one, nobody can, unless you're deep into the history of the trail, you can't name the first pioneers of the trail. Nobody knows Earl Schaefer. Nobody knows Gene Espy. And part of the reason for those things, because they weren't getting a lot of attention. The greater America did not know about the Appalachian Trail when they were hiking the Appalachian Trail. So it wasn't that big of a deal that these two guys walked it. In fact, when Schaefer walked it, he got one story in the ATC Trailway News, whatever that is, was back in the day. But it wasn't a lot of attention focused on the trail until a national magazine writes about the trail in 1949, National Geographic magazine. But by 49, when this article is published, the trail was in a state of disrepair. So you have a lot of attention coming to the trail from the National Geographic magazine, including Emma Gatewood, who read about it in that magazine. But at the same time, the trail had kind of fallen apart, and it hadn't, post-war, it hadn't gotten back up to snuff. And so Emma Gatewood in 1955, number one, she introduced, because of when people found out that there was a 67-year-old woman hiking from Georgia to Maine, it really blew people back. It was a more newsworthy story than two young guys, whatever, hiking the whole thing. Guys, soldier from World War II hiking the whole thing. Old news. But 67-year-old woman, that's something different. So she's introducing, with the news coverage, introducing greater America to the idea that the trail even existed. And then through her criticism of the trail in places like Sports Illustrated magazine and to the Associated Press, big news outlets, she's bad mouthing the trail, saying there are long stretches that were unblazed. This embarrassed the people who were in charge of upkeep of the trail, the Appalachian Trail Conference. And so they started a new effort to blaze the trail, to keep it maintained, um, to fix areas of trail that were unblazed and so forth. And it led to a rebolstered effort of maintenance. So all these things happened while she's hiking. She's bringing attention to the trail for the first time. Right after her hike in 1955, you see the numbers of attempts at through hikes start to go up. By the time she finishes her third through hike, which got as much attention as her first two hikes, um, the numbers really start to go through the roof. And people, I think, realized the trail is there, it's achievable, and a 67-year-old woman has done it 3 times. Let's go do it.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot more people start to use the AT. Um, and those are the things that lead me to believe that, it's okay to make the claim this woman saved the Appalachian Trail, because it really was at risk of falling. Had nobody come along to like bring new attention to it, it could have fallen into, it's always at risk, right? They tell you this today. It is always at risk. There's always a chance somebody decides, so one of the private property owners that allows the trail to pass through decides, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. Um, Somebody decides we need a road going right through here. This happens, and they build a road and they don't think about the trail. And so anyways, she helped in all of these three avenues and saved the AT.
I think you can make a very solid case, and I would agree with that. And as a trail maintainer for 10 years, even the trail itself, it does not take long to grow back
Oh,
in and reclaim itself. So, look, you've been very gracious with your time, and I'm going to let you go. But before we do, just one last thing I'd like to get your thoughts on. In reading the book, it was 1955, so 70 years ago when she did it. You did it this year. I thru-hiked last year. A lot of the same themes persisted for me. People talk about, oh, there's too much trail magic now, and of course we have the technology and things, but when you really dig below that, below the surface of just what I call just those superficial things, I really felt that, people helping her out, being proud of what she was doing, getting that attention, and the relationships she made that endured well beyond after she hiked the trail, and those, just like you and I made those kinds of relationships. The theme of the trail, whether it reroutes a different way or goes over a mountain or doesn't, it's still there, right? I mean, did you still feel that after, your research and then doing it this year?
oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. You know what? Every time you pop into a local business, trailside business, you see almost every one. There's a wall or a mirror or a section of the store that's covered in postcards from people who've stopped in there on their way to Mount Katahdin and then saw fit afterwards. They had such an experience of whatever that place was. And maybe it was just a little bit of kindness. Maybe it was good food. Maybe it was whatever. But they had such a moment of, and they swapped names and numbers with the person who's there, that months later, when they get off trail and get finished and the film gets developed and they decide, oh, this is the best, they take time to send thank you to those little trailside businesses, and this means so much to me as a guy who like thinks about the culture of the trail. I didn't do that because that's too much effort, like I'm not gonna, but I did meet people on the trail. I kept their numbers and I'll keep in touch with them, folks like you.
Yeah.
But just seeing those things, uh seeing flipping through the scrapbook at the shoot, what's the famous hostel in Pennsylvania? The Doyle.
Yeah.
Flipping through the scrapbook, sitting at the bar at the Doyle, and seeing names of people that I uh, that I had heard of on the trail, names like Captain Jack. I never knew this guy, but he's a guy that's so remembered on the trail from his antics and the way he was that people still talk about him. You know, um, this yeah, that spirit beyond Grandma Gatewood, like that spirit is still alive, and it's such like this cool insular culture that I remember reporting this book September 26th of 2011 or 2012, I think. My wife and I at the time climbed Mount Katahdin up Hunt Spur because I wanted to try to get further into Grandma Gatewood's head. At a minimum, I needed to see the summit. So we actually got Paul Santacondro, who was at the time the superintendent of trails in Baxter State Park, to figure out the exact path using Gatewood's diaries to figure the exact path she would have taken from the Penobscot all the way up to the summit. And so we followed her footsteps, what would have been her footsteps in 1955. And we get up to the top, and it was a day in which I don't know, many people were finishing their thru hikes. I felt like such an outsider, even though I had the right backpack, I looked like just like everyone else. I felt like such an outsider because I was short that experience that these people who were taking their summit photos had had. I'd made it to the same summit, but I didn't share in that thing that they had. And I felt like I was an alien, on foreign ground. Um, to do this experience again and to get to that same summit again and to know that I'm carrying the experiences all that I had starting at Springer Mountain in Georgia and carrying with me all these different tiny moments of strangers met, songs sung, and bird song heard, and salamanders spotted, and so on and so forth. Carrying all those things up to Mount Katahdin, I no longer felt like a stranger. I felt like it was like I was meant to be there. And I think as a people, every single one of us would benefit from that experience. It would make us such a better place if every college kid got a chance to like get before you enter the real world, go do a through hike on the Appalachian Trail, funded by. I should do a sponsorship or something, some kind of scholarship, Grandma Gatewood scholarship, where if you want to take a year off and do a through hike, I'll give you $3,000. Or we're gonna be scrimp. You can only eat ramen or whatever. But I'll give you $3,000 to go hike the AT. I think it would be this country would be such a better place for that experience. I wish everybody could have it. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Don't you?
I'll throw in 1,000. Let's make it
Yeah,
4. All right, we'll
yeah.
make it 4. Look, I first want to thank you, for your time first and foremost. I could talk to you all day, so I really, really appreciate it. I want to congratulate you as well on finishing your through hike because as someone who's done it, I know it is not easy. I mean, the physical part is tough. My emotions were like a roller coaster. So the mental part, which they say is tougher than the physical. I don't know if I totally believe them, but that is a hard part. And then, for folks watching or listening today, if you haven't read this book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk, The Inspiring Story of the Woman Who Saved the Appalachian Trail, I highly recommend you get it. You can get it wherever you get books, whether you're ever planning to hike the AT or not. And like I said, if you have, because what I enjoyed is when you talked about her going through, Hot Springs and Damascus and Cheshire,
Yeah.
Bennington, all these little, Port Clinton. Like I
Yeah.
was there with her. I could see it now. So if anybody, whether you've hiked the AT or not, I suggest you go out and get it because it is just a great book. And like I said, it's almost written in a first person kind of way. So I think you did a lovely job with that.
Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you doing this podcast to keep us all inspired and learning more about the outdoors.
Yes.
So, yeah,
It's my way
I'm
to
glad.
stay connected. It's
Glad
my
you
way to stay connected to the trail.
I'll tell you, I met in Gorham, New Hampshire, bubble wrap, and I got in there, and there was a woman sleeping in the barn hostel. She was leaning on a couch like this, snoring, her head kicked back, and we were like, "Who is that elderly woman sitting over there?" Because she looked like a hiker. You can tell, right, Sloggy? You
Oh
can.
yeah. Yeah.
I see people. I'm like, they're a hiker. Out here. I'm in New Orleans right now. Anyways, I see this woman. Who is that? Some of the people in the hostel said, "Oh, that's Betty." They call her Legend. She's trying to finish a through hike, and she fell. Face was beat up, and she was waiting around for somebody who was hiking at a slower pace because she was afraid to go through Mahoosuc Notch by herself. And so, anyways, I get off the trail, met her, chatted with her a little bit. It was awesome meeting her out there. 80 years old, 80. Get back off trail. Maybe a week or two ago, I see the news on the trek that Betty, Legend, has finished a through hike of the AT. There's some people who are asking questions about whether it's truly a through hike. I don't care, whatever. But so cool to see an 80-year-old woman out there with a beat up face. Not to say it's cool to see her with a beat up face, but it's
Yeah.
cool to see an 8-year-old woman out there trying to finish a through hike. It did my heart good. I should have slowed down. I regret not slowing down and walking with her through Mahoosuc Notch. But I just couldn't afford to slow down quite that much. but it was a great reminder near the, getting off the trail and seeing that she had the perseverance to finish that hike, and that's not an easy stretch from Gorham to the
Mhm,
rest of it. You know,
mhm.
you know, tough legs through there. So, um, anyway, super cool to see that, and super cool to know that there are still people in all walks of life who are finding themselves out on the trail. And anyhow, I'm still in a celebratory mode, so
Oh,
it's to hear your thanks and your congratulations. I
no,
accept.
I
Thank you.
I I I get it, man. Yeah, and then stories like her are inspiring, and it keeps me connected to the trail, and I
Yeah,
probably won't ever, but thanks a lot, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
yeah, man. I'll see you out there, Sluggy.
Okay, bye bye.
Thanks.